Good evening. This is Left, Right and Centre. I'm Nidhi Razdan. With some leading economists expressing doubts over India's latest GDP figures, the Finance Minister has told NDTV the numbers are good despite demonetization because there were so many more banking transactions. But the opposition has now jumped in, saying the 7% growth for the last quarter is fudged. The question is whether the GDP data is credible. We'll be talking about that in just a little while. But first, the news that's breaking at this hour: the President of India has made a very strong speech on the campus violence that we have seen in Delhi University over the past few days, as well as the attacks that we have seen on a young LSR student, particularly online. The President, while speaking in Kochi this evening, has said, among other things, that freedom of speech and expression is one of the most important fundamental rights guaranteed by our Constitution. There should be no room in India for the intolerant Indian. He's gone on to say it's tragic to see universities caught in the vortex of violence and disquiet, that those in universities must engage in reasoned discussion and debate rather than propagating a culture of unrest. He's also said, very importantly, that the acid test of any society is its attitude towards women and children. When we brutalize a woman, we wound the soul of our civilization. I do not consider a society or state to be civilized if its citizens' behavior towards women is uncivilized. Let's listen in to some of the President's key comments tonight.
Universities are expected to attract the mighty minds in the forms of teachers and students. Each center of higher learning is expected to be the hub of intellectual exercises, free thinking, free exchange of views, free expression, which are essential to advance a nation. Can we put any thought of this thinking? Can we put any restriction? And if there be some aberration, is it not the responsibility of the society to correct that aberration? Because
well, we're going to go back to more of what the President has said as soon as we get those clips of his speech. We're getting them bit by bit, but very important statements there. Let me just get a quick first reaction from Mr. GVL Rao of the BJP, who joins us tonight, before I move on to the rest of the panel. Mr. Rao, any thoughts on what the President has said about the need for universities to debate rather than propagate a culture of unrest, no room for intolerance? He said, that India has been a bastion of free thought, speech and expression, and that there must be creativity and free thinking in our universities.
No, Nidhi, as a general rule, we do not comment on the statements of the Honorable President of India, because I do not want any kind of party-specific commentary or debates on what the President says. But I don't find, but the statement that he has made, I think, addresses the current issue of the student unrest in various college campuses that we are witnessing today. There is complete freedom of speech in our country, but at the same time, as a party, we have articulated our concerns. The freedom of speech does not extend to taking up a subversive line or advocating a subversive thought. So that's a party view that we have, and we will continue to engage that thought. But at the same time, certainly we are a democratic country where freedom of expression is certainly, I think it has no bounds. But as long as you do not really cross the Rubicon, I think certainly that's a matter of concern. But what the Honorable President said, I think it's a message for the whole country, and he always speaks as a statesman. So I do not really want to get into any political comment on what he said.
All right, fair enough. And just to tell our viewers, in case you didn't know, that Jawaharlal Nehru University has actually won the Visitors Award for the best university this year. So that's something to chew on perhaps over the next hour. But we're going to move on to the other big story that we're gathered here for tonight, and that is the state of the Indian economy. Now, for the last 48 hours or so, many economists have been puzzled by India's GDP figures that were put out by the government just a couple of days ago, where it was said that India grew at 7% in the last quarter, and this was after demonetization or the note ban took place, as the Prime Minister announced that more than 85% of India's currency was going out of circulation on the 8th of November. Now, many believe that perhaps these figures haven't entirely taken into account what demonetization has done, but the opposition has taken it a step further. Now you have the Congress, the left and other parties saying that these figures have been completely fudged. The government, however, says that is not the case. Arun Jaitley, the finance minister, telling NDTV today that there were more banking transactions, and that is why India's economy has been able to survive the impact of demonetization. Joining us tonight, we have Siddharth Birla, the former president of FICCI, with us. Mr. Rao, of course, is here. Abhijit Sen, former member of the Planning Commission. We have Mihir Sharma of the Observer Research Foundation here with us, and Stanley Pignell of The Economist joining us tonight as well. Let me take that question first to you, Abhijit Sen. Are you skeptical about this data as well? What did you think?
Well, I'm certainly surprised by it because it flies in the face of, I think, all expectations, all projections. And I would like to say that there is a fudge in this, but I think it certainly does call for understanding whether the way we measure our GDP is able to deal with the sort of dislocations that we've been through.
What was your
and
expectation?
Therefore, I think the real question is I could go on a little bit more.
Sure.
I mean, what this shows really is that compared to the previous quarter, output seems to have gone up in all sectors except construction and finance. The rate of growth has gone up in all sectors. In terms of demand, the consumption demand has gone up massively. Investment, which was going down, has gone up. Now, all of this is very surprising. In fact, the data that the CSO has given also allows us to make some prediction, or at least the implicit prediction that the CSO has on what's going to happen next quarter. And from that you get it, overall GDP will grow down slightly, all sectors will slow down other than construction and finance. Is returning to a normality which, again, one can't quite understand. My problem is whether it's the method or whether it's something else, it's difficult to understand.
Okay, well, that's been certainly very bluntly put. Siddharth Birla, what about you? Did the figures surprise you as well?
Nidhi, I think as business or as a business organization, we need to take these figures at face value, because that is a statistical organization interpreting the data in whichever way they see fit. But I think as a business house, we have to look a little beyond the numbers and ask ourselves some questions, because ultimately the future growth is going to be the result of a lot of actions on the economic front. I mean, on the commercial front, how businesses operate, how they will operate. I think what we need to ask ourselves is that on one hand, you have a growth number that was published yesterday. How does that tally with the health of businesses per se? Now, if the health, if this is the health of businesses at 7% growth, then I think we have a lot more to worry about than just measure the growth number. If this is the employment that is being generated or livelihoods that are being generated with a 7% growth, I think we have a lot to worry about and see what are our next steps if we want the next cycle of growth to keep up.
That's very important what you're saying. What you're saying is that there's a mismatch between, in a sense, what the GDP numbers are and what the health of companies is in real terms, in terms of employment generation in particular. You're saying that's not adding up.
I think there is some disconnect somewhere, or maybe the viability of the industry is not good enough. But then, at 7% growth, if the viability is not there, where is the viability going to come back? At 10%, 11%, 9%? I can't say. But then we have to from the industry's point of view, we have to see what is to be done next? How is the investment cycle going to catch up? How's the consumption cycle going to catch up? And most importantly, I think at this point of time, we have to worry about confidence. That is consumer confidence in order to keep the markets going, business confidence in order to keep the investment or starting the investments. If we don't have these two, the next quarters will not look as good.
Okay, before I take this to the journalists, then Mr. Rao, let me ask you, here you have Abhijit Sen, you have Mr. Siddharth Birla, both of them, I think not entirely able to understand how these figures tie up with the state of the rest of the economy at this point. Mr. Rao.
Yeah, Nidhi, I think the first thing is it has to be taken as axiomatic. Statistics don't lie. And India's national statistics is among the most credible in the world. And if anybody doubts it on the panel, I would like to hear from them. Certainly. So the numbers don't really lie. It is only people's estimates and people's understanding of issues, I think, got fudged. I think they were unable to see. This is not a routine thing that happens. This has happened possibly for the first time on this scale in this country. Therefore, people didn't know what kind of impact it could have. So rather than continue to crib about their estimates going wrong, I think it's time for them to really look at these numbers and try to understand the meaning behind them. So I think that's what anyone with scientific temperament would do. I think it's easy to say these numbers, they don't fall into place. In 2014 Lok Sabha elections, nobody expected us to get a majority on our own. Nobody gave us more than 220 seats. Did it mean that we did not win that election? I think people sometimes estimate, economists, sometimes experts, cannot visualize a scenario. Everyone in this country, including Professor Sen, for whom I have great regard on the panel, they all said this agricultural season would suffer greatly. But the actual reality has turned out to be different. And my own experience across several villages and districts in several states which went to polls recently, I did not find a farmer who did not sow a crop in this Rabi season. But sitting here in Delhi, we all felt farmers would go completely burst. They would not have the money to sow. I think these are the kind of simplistic analysis and hypothesis you have. But when your hypothesis has been proved wrong, please look for reasons rather than question numbers. And as far as employment is concerned, even in the UPA 1 tenure, I think I'm sure Mr. Birla would agree with me, when the economy was growing at a robust 7-8% or higher, we didn't have employment growth. I think this is what Professor Rangarajan of the Prime Minister's economic advisor is on record saying
Mr.
at
Rao,
that time. We have had a good economic growth, but there is no growth for the employment.
It's not about one or two economists that are raising these questions. Stanley, let me come to you first. We've actually seen the State Bank of India initially say that these numbers were too good to be true in their words. I think that was later removed. Then you have Standard Chartered saying the data is masking reality. Kotak Equities saying the data coverage is incomplete. Edelweiss Securities saying it could be due to inventory build-up. Across the board, the reaction has been a bit cautious. Stanley, is this because, as Professor Sen seems to suggest, he's just trying to understand whether the methodology somewhere, there's an issue with that? Or, the opposition's taken it a step further and saying that, these numbers are being cooked up. What do you think, Stanley?
Well, measuring GDP is just as much an art as a science. I think people think that it's something which is very definitive and very well established. Actually, statisticians spend an awful lot of time trying to figure out how an economy, in this case of one with 1.3 billion people, how it's behaved. I think it's certainly true that the GDP figures, the readings have raised eyebrows. It's a big jump saying just because they raise eyebrows that they're wrong. And it's another big jump to say if they are indeed inaccurate, that it's for political reasons. I disagree a little bit with the BJP spokesman that nobody has challenged the CSO in terms of the quality of the data. Actually, the quality of Indian statistics gets frequently brought into question. The World Bank has done it. The International Monetary Fund has done it. But what's important is that nobody suggests that they are fudging the data for political reasons. but they do suggest occasionally that actually the quality of the inputs that go into the calculations and the way that the calculations are done sometimes end up with figures that don't necessarily correspond to global best standards. So I think there's no evidence that these figures are fudged for political reasons, but I wouldn't be surprised if in the next month, 2 months, 6 months, we see revisions to what are in fact preliminary figures coming out now.
And that's what a lot of people are saying, that there could actually be revisions to this number. But Mihir, you actually wrote a piece asking whether India is becoming another China with an incredible growth momentum and statistics nobody quite believes. Can you explain that?
I think the crucial question here is it the case that we can look at these preliminary numbers and say, all right, they're a good picture of the Indian economy? And just as with China for many years, probably for different reasons, we will have to now start supplementing our GDP figures with other high frequency data that might give us a clearer picture of what's going on. In China, the reason was overtly political for such things. I do not think that we are at that stage here. But definitely we have reached a position where maybe because of the complexity of the economy, maybe because of the methodology of the new GDP, we are not in a position where we can turn to this single figure as properly representative of what's happening in the economy. And I think that this is almost a consensus now. And I'm not saying anything particularly radical.
What are the one or two things, though, Mihir, that you think completely clash with this data? I mean, what are the other statistics and the other economic indicators that are telling you now employment is one, and Siddharth Birla was talking about that in terms of his own on-ground experience. But what else is it that isn't making sense to you?
Well, I think a couple of people have pointed to the consumption numbers. Real consumption, private consumption has gone up by 10%, by over 10%. That this would happen in a quarter when demonetization happened is
people didn't have cash.
People are struggling to understand why that would happen, especially given the fact that it is now, according to the same data, going to go down. Growth is going to go down to around 6% in the quarter in which we all have cash again. So there's a bit of a puzzlement there. We don't understand why after 3 quarters of increasing contraction in investment is actually going down. We suddenly see a reversal of investment in the very quarter where bank credit hits its lowest point in decades, I think, since Indira was alive or something, where the growth in bank credit hits that. So there are a lot of very, very questionable components to this data. The agricultural one is not one of those questionable things. It's entirely possible we grew at this degree, that sector grew at this degree, but there are a lot of questionable things. And to tell you the truth, I think people who are saying that serious investigators of the data are saying that it has been fudged for political reasons are missing the point. I don't think that anyone is claiming that they are fudged unless they are actual politicians.
Yeah,
all right?
I'm saying it's only the opposition that's claiming that.
It's only the opposition that's claiming that, and that's oppositions will do what oppositions do. I think it is more dangerous almost that the government is using this as almost a defense of demonetization. The government should, I'm sure, have been briefed that these are preliminary figures. I'm sure they have heard all the arguments that we are making here and that analysts are making, and they shouldn't rush to judgment any more than we have.